What's up guys, also Footballtalk here, back on YouTube after a week off, where I posted my first written piece in a month, since I was focused on my divisional draft and roster review series, which I'd highly encourage you to check out after this. I talked about all 32 teams and every single player selected in the draft, discussing their roles and general makeups of those rosters. Even if you just want to check out your favorite team, I added timestamps to easily find them. You can also head over to my site, hellotofootballtalk.com, for my article on the most improved position groups overall this offseason. Let's transition now though into this two-piece mini-series, where I once again want to hit on every single team, but in a much more compact format, as I asked myself, what is kind of the one burning question for each of these franchises heading into this upcoming season? In the past, I had a similar project going on, with the biggest remaining needs for every team, but some people didn't understand that it's more realistic to address depth on the interior line than finding a franchise quarterback in June. And we just talked so much about specific players and singular positions that I thought taking a little bit more of a big picture perspective would be a welcome tweak to the format. So today we're looking at the NFC, once again moving from the north around the compass until we get to the west, before switching conferences next week. And we'll begin with the Chicago Bears. And my question here is, how early does offensive coordinator Shane Waldron unleash Caleb Williams and that aerial attack? We've already seen the Bears offense undergo a pretty drastic shift across the past 2 years. In 2022, they led the NFL with an insane 52.6 run play rate, and while that dropped down to 48.7, that still ranked second league-wide. Across that time, and now leading into this upcoming season, they've completely overhauled the wide receiver room, with the combination of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and a rookie Rome Odunze, while having moved on from a former first-round pick to what I consider a generation quarterback prospect in Caleb Williams. Now the question becomes how quickly new offensive coordinator Shane Waldron is willing to put the game in the hands of his young signal caller and put stress on defenses through the air. Looking at that same 2-year stretch, Seattle's offense under his coaching ranked 20th and 28th respectively in percentage of run plays at a substantially lower 38.4%. Obviously Waldron was working with a veteran quarterback in Geno Smith and had one of the better receiving collections there as well. But even under a more old school head coach in Pete Carroll, and with a highly talented back in Kenneth Walker in the backfield, the offensive identity was built around pushing the ball vertically through the air. Chicago did surprisingly spend up on DeAndre Swift, despite already having a quality young backfield, and they've constructed the offensive line in a way that would support winning on the ground. With how good the defense was over the latter half of last season under Matt Eberflus, we could certainly see them opt for a more conservative approach to complement that, but the true ceiling of this attack won't be fulfilled until they put the ball into the hands of the young playmaker at the quarterback position. So what the plan is at this point to bring him along, and how things may change on the fly, will definitely be something to pay attention to. Which has us moving on to the Detroit Lions, and the question here, can a secondary edge rusher emerge for them? I had a second question here originally, and looking across the landscape of NFL content, you'll see some variation of this topic come up at some point. Can Jameson Williams become a consistent component of the offense? They have the possession-style receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown to keep the offense on schedule on converting fourth downs, but they need that big play option and someone who really threatens the deep parts of the field. With that being said, who can be the complement to Aiden Hutchinson off the edge defensively may be equally important, considering how little they got out of that group last season. Hutch's 101 pressures in the regular season ranked behind only Dallas's Micah Parsons. Second on the list for Detroit was Lim McNeil on the interior with 34, despite missing a month, and the next closest actual edge was Charles Harris with 24. That was tied for 81st at the position for the year. The former second overall pick was double teamed at nearly a 30% rate, which was right up there with Defensive Player of the Year Myles Garrett, behind only Parsons yet again. Not only does that make his production even more impressive, but it also speaks to the incapability of the rest of the group to take advantage of the one-on-one matchups. The guy they already had on the roster who has really flashed in the past was James Houston IV, who shockingly racked up 8 sacks in just 7 games as a 6th round rookie in 2022, but was placed on injury reserve week 2 last season. A top 50 pick from the same class in Josh Pascal has turned himself into a solid run defender, but hasn't gotten to the quarterback a whole lot. And the guy likely starting at the strong side the end spot is free agent Marcus Davenport, who turned himself into a productive player as a former first round pick in New Orleans, but was limited to just 4 games due to high ankle sprain in Minnesota last season, now in his second straight 1-year prove-it deal. Next up, the Green Bay Packers, and for them I have here, how much more aggressive will new defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley be in how he constructs his defense? There's already been a lot of buzz around the Packers pretty much since last season came to an end, with how bright Jordan Love's star was shining over the second half of the year especially, with a lot of the young pieces around him on offense having another year to grow together, and a defense that is loaded with former first round picks. With that being said, there's a lot of uncertainty on the other side of the ball and what this unit might actually look like after they, understandably, moved on from Joe Barry. The new defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley is one of the more intriguing figures across the NFL because we have such little information on what his defensive scheme that he intends to run is in Green Bay. At the pro level, he's only ever been a defensive backs coach before he started to make a name for himself as co-defensive coordinator at Ohio State, and then was signed as head coach for Boston College these last 4 years. Looking at the back end, Hafley's defenses have consistently been near the top of the FBS in terms of the usage of single high coverages, while up front he used a lot more of the traditional 4-3 looks. However, of course the quality of competition you face, the offensive designs of your opponents, and even just the geometry of the field, due to the wider hash marks, is different at the collegiate level. Green Bay has some big players on the edges, and Devonte Wyatt could be a breakout guy when allowed to penetrate more on the interior. The second level is built on speed, but in terms of the secondary, while they have a couple of outside corners that thrive in isolated situations, the safety types would dictate more split safety structures, since they're all more comfortable breaking on stuff in front of them or dropping down into the slot, rather than patrolling the high post, other than maybe Xavier McKinney who deciding for agency. So I'm fascinated by what this may look like. And the fourth team of the NFC North, the Minnesota Vikings, for them I've written down, can Sam Darnold hold up the fort, or do we see the rookie early? The Vikings had a massive decision to make this offseason. How much are they willing to pay up for Kirk Cousins, or are they ready to move into the next phase of this operation altogether? Clearly they weren't ready to commit another $100 million guaranteed across the next 3 years to the veteran signal caller, where this organization is continually needed to extend further into the future to limit its cap charge, even as they've overhauled the front office and coaching staff. Yet while Kirk finished 6th in EPA per play among quarterbacks last season, until tearing his Achilles at the midpoint of the year, it was time for Kevin O'Connell to find his own long-term solution under center, and do so with the benefit of being a rookie quarterback deal. Yet while there was discussion about how Minnesota might want to trade up as high as number 2 overall, they actually just swapped spots with the Jets one pick ahead of them at number 10 to secure themselves Michigan's JJ McCarthy, and recently we actually received reports around them potentially moving up for LSU wide receiver Malik Neighbors instead. What actually happened was they just extended the superstar pass catcher Justin Jefferson expectedly, and another rookie who might throw in the ball could be someone they didn't spend massive capital on and isn't necessarily the most pro ready, I would say. That leaves the door open for veteran Sam Darnold, who only just turned 27 years old himself, which is kind of wild to think about, and is earning $10 million this season to prove himself. People may argue that he's received plenty of opportunities, but across the 5 seasons that he's received actual playing time, only for like one half of those, he had an offensive line that wasn't bottom 5 in the league, and other than now leaving Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, every offensive play call he's worked with for a full season ended up getting fired. I believe Sam should be a tremendous fit for his play-action heavy offense with more mobility to Cousins previously. But of course the fans eventually will want to see the rookie, and we'll have to pay attention how long Sam can hold on that spot. Moving on to the NFC East now with the Dallas Cowboys, and the question for them here is the spine of this defense more solid, and do they live in base under defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer? These last 3 years with Dan Quinn as defensive coordinator, the Cowboys were the number 1 defense in terms of EPA per play, consistently being near the top of the league in pressure rates and averaging a league best 31 takeaways over that stretch. And yet, when they faced Kyle Shanahan's 49ers in the playoffs, or ran into the Packers in the wildcard round most recently, they seemed to be a step behind for the most part, particularly struggling to defend the run. At its best, Dallas during that time was playing with the lead, could pin the ears back getting after the quarterback, and create big plays. When their opponents have been able to dictate terms to them and play the balanced brand of offense, they've been a far less impactful unit, and no other team actually surrendered a higher rushing success rate last season than them at 44%. Diving into the issues this past season specifically, Marcy Smith hasn't yet come close to turn himself into the impactful shade nose tackle that they invested a first round pick in, as they actually asked him to shed weight, and therefore were vulnerable right in the middle of their front. Recently retired Leighton Vander Esch was the only linebacker at 240 plus pounds that saw the field extensively for them, and in large part because of that, the dime basically became the primary personnel set, with safeties at 205 to 215 pounds having to take on pulling linemen at times. The Cowboys asked Marcy to put weight back on, they signed what is at least still a solid run defending linebacker in Eric Hendricks, and drafted another long physical project at the position in Notre Dame's Maris Leofau in the 3rd round. More importantly, the whole mentality is about to change with an old school defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer. While he's had his faults with linebackers getting exposed in coverage, but by relying on base personnel actually, and we can question how he'll adapt to the modern NFL passing game after a couple of years as a consultant in college. I'd at least feel good about this team showing more resistance to get taken advantage of on the ground. We'll just have to see how exactly it looks like. But let's move on to the next team here, the New York Giants, and for them I've written down, can this reshuffled offensive line at least be functional? While my question about Dallas revolves more around the defensive front, the division rivals from the Big Apple are still looking to figure out how to at least not sink their offense by having a rotating cast of characters looking to create openings in the run game and protecting the passer. Since the previous regime drafted quarterback Daniel Jones in 2019, only once was the offensive line ranked top 20 in both run and pass blocking grade by Pro Football Focus, and they finished 9th in EPA per play as an offense in 2022, going 9-7-1 as a team and winning a playoff game on the road. Left tackle Andrew Thomas was a second team All-Pro that year and has established himself as a top-tier player at the position when healthy, but he only played just over half of the snaps this past season. However, while we were hoping top 10 pick Evan Neal could take a similar development path as Thomas following a rough rookie campaign, his PFF grade sank even further to below 40 with worse pressure numbers and high rate of penalties, playing even less than again the opposite end of the line. As far as the interior goes, rookie center John Michael Schmitz struggled to find any consistency, which was his trademark in Minnesota, and I think he might have actually graded us the worst center in the NFL, while they went with journeyman and young, unproven players at guard. This offseason, they moved on from the previous de facto starters at both the spots, while bringing in free agents Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyan, Aaron Stinney, and Matt Nelson for competition. Illuminor should push Neal for the starting gig at right tackle, but he did start his career inside. If he can be a quality starter at either spot, and they don't have a turnstile at one of those, that should determine if this offense can look more like it did in 2022, when Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka were able to put together a functional offense MacGyver style, potentially with more explosive pieces, or if they look as broken as they did this past year. Next we have the Philadelphia Eagles, and I want to know, what does this marriage between Kyle Moore and Jeff Stoutland look like? Following the departure of now Colts head coach Shane Steichen as Philadelphia's offensive coordinator 2 years ago, the Eagles often struggled to find consistent designs to structure the attack around and put together comprehensive game plans. They almost purely operated out the shotgun, the run game was very simplistic, built around a league high rate of just over 50% inside zone. They tipped off their opponents or plays based on formations and connected motions that they used, and there was no functioning marriage between those two facets. That seems almost unthinkable when watching Jalen Hurts emerge as an MVP runner-up with an elite offensive line and group of skill position players around him the year prior. The guy who touches the ball first on every single play in Jason Kelce is now retired, but the rest of the front five remains fully intact, and Cam Jurgens was handpicked 2 years ago as a replacement by the Hall of Fame center himself. Moreover, they stole an all-pro running back in Saquon Barkley away from the division rivals in the Giants, without true difference makers at the position previously, and they moved on from Brian Johnson at offensive coordinator. What I'm most interested in now is how this unit truly comes together and what the optimal plan might look like, with Kyle Moore bringing in new ideas for a drop-back passing game, while offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland supposedly should be heavily involved in the designs of the rushing attack. In an optimal world, Moore installs route patterns that actually put defenders in conflict. They not only use motion at a higher rate, but with actual purpose, and Hurts has solutions, as well as knows where they are when he's being blitzed, which defenses did at an NFL high 40.5% rate last year, and his numbers plummeted as a result. The enigma here might be how much more we see them go under center. Do they evolve a more varied gun run game, or do they find happy medium with some pistol sets possibly? That's all to be figured out still. And the final team of the NFC East, the Washington Commanders. For them I question, do any of these secondary receiving options emerge? Looking at the people this new Washington ownership handed this organization to this offseason, Dan Quinn is getting a second chance to be a head coach, and is looking to install some of the principles that made the Cowboys the number one defense in the EPA play, as I previously mentioned, over this 3-year run in Dallas. Reigning Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels is supposed to bring a two-way dynamism to the quarterback position that this fan base hasn't seen since the early promise of Robert Griffin III, and new general manager Adam Peters signed several free agents to help kickstart this rebuild in the mold of what he was part of in San Francisco. However, in the short run, it may be more telling how offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury can set up his rookie quarterback for early success, and which of the ancillary pieces can provide consistent production, efficiency on the ground, and what the new play call does in terms of creating favorable looks in that regard, is the part I'm actually far less worried about. However, while there was never any real discussion among NFL teams, I have to believe, about who should be the number 1 pick in the draft, a lot of the negatives on the scouting report of Caleb Williams are tied to questionable structures in the pass game and the Kingsbury at USC, along with poor protection and little separation by the receivers, of course. We've yet to see if anybody can emerge at left tackle in the nation's capital, but even more glaring is how reliant they could be on Terry McLaurin as the primary target in the pass game. Jahan Dotson didn't have the second-year breakout that many projected, as he was less efficient and found the end zone about half as many times in 5 extra games, while questioned how they actually used him as well. The 2 legitimate additions that they made were veteran tight end Zach Ertz, after being limited to 7 games with a quadriceps injury last season, and third-round pick Luke McCaffrey out of Rice, who only transitioned from quarterback to wide receiver 2 years ago. So unless a couple of these guys step up significantly, this is far from what Jaden had at LSU. Bringing us to division number 3, the NFC South, starting with the Atlanta Falcons, and the question we all have to ask for them, is this a healthy quarterback room, or is there any internal turmoil? And you can take the term healthy quite literally, with Kirk Cousins coming off the torn Achilles that he suffered in the middle of last season, and to a lesser degree the extensive injury history of rookie Michael Penix Jr. from his days at Indiana, before turning himself into one of the deadliest gunslingers in college football his last 2 years. However, this was meant more in the sense of how they function as a group, and if there's disagreement within the organization, when, who should be playing, and who other guys gravitate towards. Cousins has certainly built a reputation as an above-average starter, as a mainstay in Washington and then Minnesota these last 9.5 seasons, and with $100 million guaranteed over the next 3 years, this new regime in Atlanta is committed to him. Yet when they shocked the NFL world by selecting Penix 8th overall in the draft, not only was the veteran and his agent blindsided, but it also brings up the potential of a weird relationship between the two, which could rub off on the rest of the team. While there's an adjustment period for any rookie, as Penix will be challenged to solve more complex defensive structures and can't rely as heavily on just letting the ball fly down the field, but this is a 24-year-old 6th-year senior who will not happily just wait his turn behind the vet. This becomes even more challenging as Kirk may not yet have full confidence in his leg, limiting his ability to move around obviously, but also just pushing off on the release, while Penix has that flamethrower attached to his left shoulder and won't shy away from letting it rip. As teammates observed it in practice, and considering if the ceiling may be higher with the rookie, or maybe Cousins isn't full himself by week 1, could there be internal conversations that get to the media, and does his coaching staff ultimately make a decision that throws off this already wonky timeline even further? Next they are the Carolina Panthers, and my question for them is, what's the pecking order and distribution of opportunities for the skill position group? You don't go 2-15 unless your entire team really sucked. This wasn't one of those situations where the Panthers were unlucky in a couple of games, and the record looks worse than they actually performed, as they finished 31st in points scored and 29th in points allowed. Nevertheless, I believe there's reason for optimism around this defense, which brought by coordinator Ejiro Evero, and while they need guys to step up, this is a unit with stand-up performance at all 3 levels, and only the Patriots had a higher mark of adjusted games lost to injury last season than them on that side of the ball. Obviously, the development of Bryce Young, now working with Dave Canales, is the biggest key here, after the latter just helped another former first overall pick in Baker Mayfield resurrect his career. They've spent heavy financial resources on addressing this offensive line, as they're paying their new guard tandem an average of just over $33 million, with nearly 60% of that guaranteed, trying to keep the integrity of the pocket upright. In terms of the skill position guys, they swapped out a starting corner in Dante Jackson for former Steelers wide receiver Deontay Johnson, moved up one spot in the draft to another one in South Carolina's Xavier Leggett as the final pick of the first round, traded up in the second for Texas running back Jonathan Brooks, and even at the top of day 3, they got Brooks' teammate Jatavian Sanders as a versatile tight end / H-back / big slot, whatever you want to call it. That's on top of 34-year-old Adam Thielen being back for at least 1 more year, who was the only guy to consistently create some kind of separation and gain the trust of his rookie quarterback, a receiver they targeted early in the second round last year in Jonathan Mingo, and running back Miles Sanders being on the second of his 4-year deal, which he'll likely try to get out of next offseason due to an abysmal debut campaign in Charlotte, which is why Chuba Hubbard may be more so competing for opportunities with the rookie running back, but I believe Brooks becomes the elite guy once he's fully back from the torn ACL, and Deontay Johnson, when healthy himself, is the number 1 target recipient, but generally I'm really unsure where exactly they line off those guys up, how much they see the field, and who they prioritize getting the ball to. Next up, the New Orleans Saints, and for them it's kind of the opposite here. Does this aging defense finally take a step back? I wanted to provide some variety, since it would be very easy to just ask if Derek Carr can at least be an average quarterback or better, considering he's reverted to being a checkdown captain who openly showed frustration towards a receiving corps that could have easily returned the favor, considering they got more favorable opportunities themselves when Jameis Winston was in the lineup instead while the starter was banged up. How serious the concerns about Ryan Ramchik's knee are, depending on that if first-round pick Talise Fuanga can make a successful transition to left tackle, and if there's any hope of Trevor Penning to at least come close to his draft pedigree, if/when he's called upon, are incredibly meaningful. But instead, I want to take a look at this defense, which has been a preeminent unit for this franchise since the late years of Drew Brees. If you consider the defensive line as an overarching unit, the 4 highest paid and still probably best defenders across the major positions, Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Marshall Lattimore and Tyrann Mathieu, have been in the league for a combined 47 seasons. Lattimore's the youngest of the bunch, now entering year 9, and there were rumors around him potentially being on the trade block after drafting another corner in Alabama's Kool-Aid McKinstry to pair up with the already very formidable starting trio. They smartly extended Kyle Granderson on the edge at the start of his best season as a pro. Pete Warner's quickly learned from Davis on the second level, and safety Jordan Howden performed well when he was given an extended run as a rookie. However, there's reason to believe that we could see a couple of those stalwarts take another step back, and if Clint Kubiak can't turn this into a more dynamic offense, after Pete Carmichael calls traditional West Coast stuff there for the last 15 years, and the defense can't provide them a baseline for success, the focus will shift towards now head coach Dennis Allen, who has run that unit for the last decade. The final team of the NFC South and the actual champs last year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. For them I'm curious, what does this run game look like under new defensive coordinator Liam Cohen? If you're talking about surprise teams from last season, along with the Texans on the AFC side, I believe the Bucs performed above expectations more than pretty much anybody else. Based on preseason betting odds, only the Cardinals had a low projected win total than an over-under of 6.5, yet they ended up winning 9 games and took the hapless NFC South crown before defeating a broken down Eagles team at home in the wildcard round. A largely intact defense provided a higher flow than maybe anticipated, but it's the offense that really elevated them here. As just discussed, then offensive coordinator Dave Canales played an integral role in turning Baker Mayfield into what, based on the numbers, was an above-average starting quarterback last season. Before he was hired as the new head man in Carolina, Rashad White was a steady drumbeat out of the backfield that will at least make the play action game viable, and that's what Baker could really strike with Mike Evans, not only continuing his now 10-year-long run of 1,000-yard seasons, but actually putting up the second highest totals of his career and leading the league with 13 touchdowns through the air. In spite of that, there's no denying that this run game has been the least efficient over the last 2 years across the NFL, averaging a measly 3.4 yards per carry, along with also being dead last in both EP per rush and rushing success rate over that stretch. Now, a grander conversation can be had around how the run game has been a means to an end for some of the play action heavy teams on early downs, and how in the aggregate, just the threat of the run game actually allows them to be efficient overall, but there's no reason they should be at the very bottom of the league, as they've now reshuffled this O-line recently. Now I'm interested in how new offensive coordinator Liam Cohen helps further what they do on the ground. He has his NFL roots with Sean McVay and the Rams, when they were still heavily reliant on outside zone, but at Kentucky last season, he was much closer to power and counter concepts that they previously used in Tampa Bay, along with duo, and as rookie running back Bucky Irving from Oregon provided a little more juice in those tight areas. Bringing us to the final division for today, the NFC West, first up with the Arizona Cardinals, and for them my question is, what does his coaching staff do with better/more pieces to work with? Maybe it's because I'm a degenerate football fan, but there aren't many more interesting teams to rewatch from last season in terms of schematics and just ideas they threw out there than these Cardinals. Head coach Donovan Gannon became a bit of a walking meme once the clip emerged of him greeting his wide receiver Rondale Moore with laser invitations the first time they met. His numbers didn't end up reflecting that, as the final 3 underwhelming years in Arizona, but there was a lot of other stuff to like about coordinator Drew Petzing's offense. Whether that was in the usage of personnel, how to involve the receivers in the capacity, or the way they used blocking angles to their advantage, with James Conner gashing opponents once he returned from injury, their run game really worked. Meanwhile, Gannon and defensive coordinator Nick Rallis were even more diverse on defense, which was backed up by several quarterbacks, particularly mentioning them as one of the tougher units to just figure out which pressure and coverages they'd run. Now, none of the numbers for them would indicate opponents weren't able to find success anyway, but that was due to their inability to stop the run, I would say, losing a couple of key pieces to injury, and the rotation of quarterbacks until Kyler Murray returned midway through the season, which made things tough on the defense. As we look ahead to 2024, however, now, it's time to actually see results instead of just ideas. They got themselves a true number 1 receiver profile with Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State 4th overall, and a versatile piece on the D-line in Missouri's Darius Robinson at the end of the first round, along with 5 more picks inside the top 100. General manager Monty Austinford didn't splurge in free agency in year 2, but there's enough young talent available now to build on some of the flashes that we saw last season, and I'm intrigued with what the next steps look like. Next we've got the Los Angeles Rams, and for them, the thing I'm wondering about, how much can this young D-line replace the presence of Aaron Donald as a group? Right off the bat, actually replacing this first-ballot Hall of Famer is an impossible task, and having any expectations about being able to do so are unrealistic. How close they can come to recreating the type of impact and his production, however, might decide how far this team can go once we turn the calendar over to 2025. Matt Stafford was an absolute flamethrower this past season and erased some of the concerns around early retirement, while running back Karen Williams and rookie receiver Puka Nacua broke out in massive ways. Considering how they've beefed up the interior of the O-line over the last 2 offseasons, I expect them to control games up front and let the guy they have back there sling it around off-play action. So this should take pressure off a defense that not only lost a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, but also one of the bright minds in terms of the X's and O's, with former defensive coordinator Raheem Morris taking the head coaching gig in Atlanta. The way Chris Shula, now elevated to calling the shots, will be able to build on the principles that allowed this unit to perform above expectations, with all the young members pushed into prominent roles last year, and or what he may add is going to be a key element as we think about the landscape of the NFC. Of course, the 2 key figures when it comes to play up front now the Florida State tandem of Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, who they spent half the draft capital on collectively. Both Corey Turner and Byron Young as the 2 likely other starters when they're in nickel, or at least mentioned as Defensive Rookie of the Year candidates at different points. Can they continue their development? Does the duo from the ACC champs find their footing right away? And how does the new play call involve the guys from the second level in the pressure packages, having started out as a linebacker coach in LA? Moving on to the San Francisco 49ers, and for them I want to know, do we see more variety or new ideas from this collective effort to coach the defense? It's rare for an NFL team to move on from all of the key figures after making it all the way to the Super Bowl, unless they get embarrassed on the biggest stage, which in this case merely making it to double overtime certainly doesn't qualify. So when the 49ers decide to cut ties with defensive coordinator Steve Wilks after just 1 season together, despite having one of the better performances on that side of the ball, until Patrick Mahomes took over late, it was surprising, even if the body of work throughout the full season makes it fair to question the validity of him coaching a unit like that. I outlined Wilks as potentially the most critical figure heading into that matchup because of the lack of ways to challenge offensive protections, disguise coverages, and weaponize star players that he had shown. I guess that 1 game sample wasn't enough, considering they did ultimately make it too easy for Kansas City on a couple of key downs. So instead, San Francisco elevated Nick Sorensen to the title of defensive coordinator, but also brought in former Chargers head coach Brandon Staley as an assistant, who could play a pivotal role this season. Sorensen has a background as a special teams captain during his playing career, and then coaching that unit in Seattle and Jacksonville, but he also had a 4-year run as a secondary coach with the Seahawks, before joining the Niners 2 years ago in the role basically. So he's rooted in the ideas of press field cover free stuff, but got to watch DeMeco Ryans transition to compressing the offense more in the way they'd squeeze down windows in zone coverage. Staley's history is a little more well known, and there's a lot to question in terms of managing a full team, but the one thing that earned him recognition with the Chargers was the hyper-specificity of some of the one-off game plans, so that's why his presence could be really meaningful as we get to a knockout setting, and I'll be paying attention to in which ways he influences what they do. Ultimately bringing us to the Seattle Seahawks as we switch sides of the ball basically again, and I wonder, does new offensive coordinator Brian Grubb allow Geno Smith to go bounds away? As we look at the final team of today, as a long-term rival of the 49ers who has not been able to make this an even series in recent years, they decided to completely overhaul the coaching staff. Pete Carroll retired, which we can wonder how much he was pushed towards that decision after 14 years of running the show, and with him, all 3 coordinators as well as several other assistants left the building. We do have a pretty good idea of what this defense could look like, with Mike McDonald coming over from Baltimore as the new head coach, and Ryan Grubb has become a fairly recognizable name, with the Washington Huskies offense becoming the spear of college football, at least in terms of the way they attacked opponents through the air, with Michael Penix Jr., Rome Odunze and company. The matter at hand now, though, is how well a system like that translates to the next level, and where the limitations may be. 11 personnel has been the main grouping across the NFL landscape for a while now, and we've seen teams adapt plenty of ways college teams stretch out defenses horizontally, but the super spread offense and the ways they push the ball vertically out of those looks isn't something we've ever watched at the pro level. The fun part in Seattle is that they have a trio of wide receivers that challenges for the title of the best in the league, along with basically another big flex pass catcher, entirely new offense to replicate some of the elements we saw at UW. However, they also did draft the primary blocker at the position early in the 4th round in Michigan's AJ Barner, and now the crux will be how much the new head coach will want to play through his defense and the run game. That's why I could see second-year running back Zach Charbonnet be on the field more as a steady in-between the tackle runner and pass protector, but you don't want to give up the dynamism of Kenneth Walker. So it's very interesting to see if they do condense formations a little bit more and the usage of those guys inside the box around that wide receiver trio. That wraps up the NFC edition of this 2-part mini-series. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the analysis, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for future episodes if you haven't done so yet. Feel free to let your opinion be heard on any of the topics discussed today, or shoot me some questions down below in the comments. You can also engage with me through my social media channels, along with staying up to date with everything I'm working on. Links are in the video description, along with the one to my website hellotofootballtalk.com, where you can find all of my written content. As I already mentioned, I put out a piece last week on the most improved position groups across the NFL. Of course, I'll be back here a week from now with the AFC version of this breakdown, hoping to have you on board for that one too. So until then, see you later. Peace!